It's recording. Okay. All right. Greetings, everybody. This is the recorded version of the equipment webinar for Beginning Farmers 120. If you are listening to it, that means that Charles Bort and his wife Meg are in the process of having their first child, and we wish them luck. So I'm really happy that he spent some time in advance to tape this presentation. I'm going to move us into the classroom. And I just want to introduce Chuck. Chuck is the team leader for the Capital District Vegetable and Berry Extension Program in the Greater Capital District of New York State. He spent the first 4 years of his extension career in the Eden Valley, and then has been in the Capital District for a little more than 8 years. He is the person that Crystal and I, turn to all the time for information about equipment. He's also a specialist with vine crops and potatoes, and he has his own small farm. So I'm going to just let Chuck take it from here, and I really appreciate his effort on this.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the webinar tonight. Sorry that I could not be with you live, but as Laura said, my wife and I are expecting our first child at any moment now. So I had a pre-existing, I guess, thing to get to. So anyway, Crystal and Laura asked me to kind of go over some of the basics on what a beginning or small farmer might need for equipment. And as you can see, equipment comes in all shapes and sizes and colors. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time tonight to just go through some of the things that I think are important when you start to look at purchasing equipment and whatnot. So we're just going to get started here. So where do we start? I think the first question that we all have to ask ourselves is what kind of scale are we looking at to farm? Are you going to be a half acre, 5 acres, 25 acres? It all makes a difference. Especially as you start to increase your acreage, your equipment needs are going to change, and it's mostly for an efficiency factor. Where that's just for example, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but a 2-bottom plow worked great for 2 acres. It may not work as well for 5 acres. It just takes you so much longer so you may need to go to a 4-bottom. I think the other thing we have to ask ourselves is how much labor do you have? And not only how much labor or time do you have, but also what quality do you have? If you have, in my case, I have an aunt that's 83 years old that works quite a bit with me, but obviously she can't do as much as, let's say, a 33-year-old. So I think you have to kind of keep that in mind as well. Back to that scale of size, do you have a lot of hand labor crops? Things like greens that may take a little bit longer, or are you going to rely on more mechanization, more equipment? Long ago, it was drummed into me by my dad to work smarter and not harder. So again, if you can mechanize something and it's not going to cost you an outrageous amount of money, why not do it? It just makes your life a lot easier, improves your quality of life, and it could also improve the quality of your product as well. And then I think you have to ask yourself, what do you already have for equipment? Did you inherit equipment or are you starting from scratch? And if you are in a neighborhood where there's other farms close to you, what might you be able to hire out or to have somebody else do for you? And things like getting fields ready for planting and things like that. If you don't have the equipment, it might be as easy for someone to just come and do it for you and pay them, or rent machinery from those folks, especially if they're local enough and they don't mind doing that. The other thought that I like to think about is have a system. it just makes your life a lot easier. And really, it's on all ends, whether it's preparing ground, whether it's planting. If you, for example, know that you want to take this 3-acre field and break it into 3 1-acre blocks, and within those blocks, you know how many beds or how many rows you're going to have at certain spacing. This really allows you to make some decisions about equipment, size of equipment, spacing of equipment, things like that. And I think for me, I'm kind of one of those guys that likes to learn visually, and so I put this little diagram together. If this was a one whole field, so this whole big blue block is one field. But within that one big field, you know that you want to have 8 rows in each one of those blocks that are, or 8 beds, I guess is the best way to say it. So if each one of these black lines represents a bed, that's 48 inches wide, and from the center of this bed to the center of this bed is exactly 8 feet every time. You know exactly how many row feet you have or how many bed feet you have in that block, so that you can do a lot of things. You can make sure that you have the right number of plants, the right spacing. All of those things can be answered. I also like the idea of putting in permanent driveways between my fields. It helps not only just to get product in and out and field work, but actually it keeps a lot of soil compaction out of your actual fields too. Because if you can harvest from these 4 rows and bring it to the driveway and put it on a trailer, obviously that is one less tractor pass across that field. It puts all the traffic right in that driveway. The other thing too that you need to keep in mind, that, and this goes back to equipment, is if this bed is too wide, you may not find a tractor that can go wide enough. And for example, there are a lot of tractors will not go any wider, the wheel spacing any wider than 60 inches. And that can actually play into certain bed spacing that you might not be able to use. If you want to go wider than 60 inches, then you have to find somebody a good machinist that can actually weld things for you. Okay, so the question I think that probably comes up first is what size tractor, especially for a small farmer, beginning farmer. And as I said earlier, they come in all different shapes, all different sizes, all different colors. I think that predominantly my 2 favorites are probably the John Deere series and also the Kubota series. And not that I'm promoting either one, but I just think that in terms of versatility, I think they have the widest range of tractors that you can select from. So there are a couple thoughts on tractors. And keep in mind that this is a little bit of my opinion in this as well. But most growers that start off would probably recommend, well, one tractor that can do a lot of things, but two tractors that are very different. One tractor would be the one that performs what we call the manual labor. Okay, so it's a tractor that does a lot of the plowing and field fitting and hauls a lot of the heavy implements and whatnot. And the second one is more of what I call the finesse tractor. So once things are established, this might be used to cultivate, or it might be used to hill, or somewhere along those lines. Not every farm needs 2 tractors. The other nice thing about having multiple tractors is that you might be able to leave, a certain implement that you use a lot, you might be able to leave right on one tractor for a long time, and instead of having to take it on and off all the time. So the utility tractor, which is going to be the bigger tractor, or what I call the grunt, again, you need to know what you're going to do with it. Are you going to be moldboard plowing, rototilling? Are you going to be carrying a disc over it? And we'll talk all about those pieces of implements here in a few minutes, but just wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about. I think in general, anybody that's probably an acre to 10 acres will do fine with a 35 to 40 horsepower tractor, especially if it's four-wheel drive. And there's a lot of reasons why I like a four-wheel drive tractor as opposed to a two-wheel drive tractor. One is that it takes a lot less horsepower to do the same job as a two-wheel tractor. So four-wheel drive tractors just make work a lot easier. Doesn't take as much out on that tractor if it's four-wheel compared to two-wheel. For certain equipment like bed shapers and other things, you have more control. You're able to actually steer when you have a implement on the back rather than just kind of hoping that you're going in the right direction. And really what it also boils down to is you need to know what kind of horsepower is needed for those implements that you're purchasing. And the best thing to do is you really need to talk to, if you're buying it from a dealership, you talk to the dealership and they have all the specs on how many horsepower a certain unit takes. And if you tell them what tractor they have, usually they can find you that implement to match it. If you're looking to buy it used and you're going through a wanted digest or something, you may still want to talk to a dealer and just get his thoughts on whether or not your tractor can pull that implement that you're interested in. Okay, and the best example I can give you again is if you have a 30 horsepower tractor and you buy a 5-bottom plow. You're not going to pull that 5-bottom plow with a 30 horsepower tractor, whether it's 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive. It's not going to happen. And we're going to go into that here in a minute when I talk about moldboard plows. The other thing that I'd like to have on one of those tractors is a loader frame. And that's for a bucket loader or a set of pallet forks, either one. Become very, very useful on any farm. And it's even better if it can be what we call a quick attach bucket or frame, where these frames have their own stands for the most part, and you pull this pin right here and then you can unhook the hoses and back right off of the whole loader. Makes it pretty convenient, and then pull right back in and hook right back up if you need to. And again, these pallet forks can be very useful, especially if you start doing some growing of some vine crops or other things like that, that you can actually just put a cardboard tub on here with a pallet and move it right through the field and then load it onto a wagon or unload it when you get back to the shop. So the pallet forks come in very, very handy. The other thing is, with any of this machinery, inevitably it will break down. More than likely it'll break down when you probably need it at the most. So what I tell guys is to find a good local mechanic if you can. And this goes for especially used equipment that you purchase, so that there may not be any support there from a dealer, or you just don't know how that equipment was used. And if the grower that had it before you took good care of it, you might not have a problem, but more than likely you're going to end up with something breaking at some point in time. And the other thing is if that mechanic, or if you can find somebody else that's a machinist, there are certain pieces of equipment that may need some tweaking just to fit your certain operation. And if you can find a good machinist early on in your farming career and a good mechanic, you're going to be a lot happier, because they can really make it or break it sometimes when it comes to fixing equipment. So I'm going to just start going over just a couple basics components of tractors that are pretty important in my opinion. You're going to hear the term 3-point hitch used an awful lot, and when you're talking about smaller acreages, most of your equipment is going to be 3-point hitched. And what a 3-point hitch is really, it's just primarily used for lifting implements that are pulled behind the tractor. there are what I call three main pieces. Okay, there's these two lift arms right here. Okay, and then there is this top link piece right here. And if you purchase an older tractor, you may be required to add something called sway bars or stabilizer bars, as they're sometimes called, which again they predominantly mount underneath right here, and are the same length as your lift arm, but it just keeps the two lift arms from wanting to separate and wobble for the most part. A lot of the newer tractors have this turnbuckle system, or they have a pin system, which is a lot, so they don't need a standalone set of sway bars, which is kind of nice. So this is a very detailed schematic of all the different components of a 3-point hitch. And I think it's also important that I point out that there are several different sizes of 3-point hitches, and this correlates to equipment. So something like a small lawn tractor that has a 3-point hitch would be considered a category 0, and something that is really large, a big piece of heavy machinery, takes a larger, because it's heavier, it takes a larger set of arms and whatnot to lift. It has a completely different set of pins and whatnot, so that it's a lot larger. Most of the machinery that we deal with falls between the category 1 and 2, especially for smaller growers. Now, so a typical, again, and I just wanted to give you another little bit of a schematic and how these things fit. But this is a brush hog. So you have these, what they call link pins on either side, okay, of your 3-point hitch implement. And what happens is these, let me go back to the next one. These arms right here slip right over those pins. And then you have another, what we call a little linch pin, that goes right through and secures that link pin within that lift arm, so it can't slide off. Okay, and then that top link arm slips right in there, and you go ahead and you put a pin right through there and lock that in. And what that top link does is it's on a it's on threads, so it helps you adjust the pitch, so to speak, of your implement. So whether you want to tip it forward or backwards, it lets you adjust your pitch that way. And these draw arms are what really help you raise and lower that piece of equipment and set your depth for the most part. Oop, going the wrong way. One of the things that I really like, and they're not very expensive, they've gotten a lot cheaper over the last couple years, is called a quick hitch. And so this this little piece of machinery right here hooks on to your 3-point hitch, okay, and it's permanent. It stays right on there, so it's hooked right onto your tractor all the time. And what's really nice is that as you go to hook up a piece of 3-point hitch equipment, essentially you just back right to it, you back under it, and those link pins fall right into place there. And your top link, you leave a bolt in the piece of machinery, so your top link fits right in there, and then you just get in and you lock these handles down, and it keeps that implement from coming off. So it's a really convenient and safe way of hooking up a piece of 3-point hitch equipment. I'm going to tell you that it can be very frustrating sometimes hooking up 3-point hitch implements, because no matter what you do, you just can't seem to get things lined up, and you're on and off that tractor 5 or 6 different times sometimes just to finally get that thing lined up and get it hooked on. And what's nice again about this 3-point hitch is it takes all of that right out of the equation. Lets you hook right up, back right up, get onto it, and take right off again. So the other piece, especially if you're going to use a lot of different machinery, will take what we call a power takeoff or a PTO shaft or drive, and that is what makes things work. It makes rototiller blades go around. It makes brush hog blades turn. Makes baler motors run, the whole 9 yards. But they are very dangerous. This is the spline end of your tractor, and this is the shaft from your piece of equipment, which slips right over that spline. So it looks something like this. Right here is your PTO shaft, and then this spins at a pretty high speed, and you have to be very careful when you're working around a PTO it's engaged or running. Because loose clothing can get caught on this, and it can wrap around that shaft and literally spin you right into the PTO shaft, and you do not want that. So we're gonna just kind of start from scratch here. We'll talk about what I call primary tillage, or it's the very first tillage that you may have to do to prepare a field. And in this case, I'm going to refer mostly to what we call moldboard plowing. And again, primary tillage is done to prepare that seed bed or prepare ground for shaping and for transplanting later on. We may want to incorporate residue, whether it's crop residue, a cover crop, or even compost in some cases. It may be used to help level out a field, and then also we use it as a means of disease and insect control as well. So there's a lot of reasons why we do primary tillage. So you've heard me talk about this a couple times, but this is what we call a moldboard plow. And when we say moldboard, this is what we refer to right here as a moldboard. Okay, they come in all colors, shapes, sizes, and widths. And this is pretty important because depending on how much of what we call a swath, or how wide this portion is right here, it's going to vary on how many horsepower. So it takes a lot less horsepower to pull a 14-inch wide moldboard than it does compared to a 20-inch moldboard. Okay. Again, as I said, they come in all shapes and sizes. You can get them in from one bottom, and this whole thing right here is considered a one bottom, or a two bottom, which this is, or three bottoms, all the way up to 20 bottoms. So they can get very big. I tend to recommend sets that have these trash wheels or sod cutters. It just makes a much cleaner cut when you go into the soil. And it lets that, in this case over here, if you look, it lets this sod roll under really nicely and get incorporated. The other thing too is they can come in manual or automatic resets. So as you're going along, and if you hit a big rock, these things don't. If these moldboards didn't have any give to them, they would just snap off, or they would stall your tractor. So what happens lots of times is that a manual reset, these will just, there's a big spring in here, these will come up, and then you have to get over whatever it was, a rock or a hard pan or a tree stump. You get over it, and then you just back up, and it just resets this moldboard to where it was supposed to be. The fancier ones and more expensive ones are these automatic resets, where you just don't stop. These are, again, two big compression springs. The whole thing just kind of pushes up, and then the springs force it right back down into the ground. Okay, where the rest of these are all manual resets. So just some terminology that you may hear. Again, that's your moldboard. That is your plow point, and that's what takes most of the abuse. It's very abrasive when you're pulling through that soil. Here's your sod cutter. And then on the backside is something that we call a landslide. And there's also a shin, what we call a shin there too. But it's these landslides and these plow points that we end up replacing depending on how many acres you do and depending on your soil type, but usually they need to be replaced every 1 or 2 years. If you let these shins, this upper piece here, or you let these landslides or the plow points get wore down, then it starts to erode into your moldboard, and I would much rather pay the $15 to replace this little piece here as opposed to the $150 it costs to replace this big moldboard piece. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go, as you think about plows. It takes a real knack to learn how to moldboard plow. It's taken me probably a lot of hours sitting on the tractor with my father and my brothers to learn how to moldboard, and some days I'm not even sure I'm still doing it correctly, but I think it's important just to think about, again, it goes back to what kind of system or develop a system for your fields. And I think the easiest system is to just break those fields into smaller blocks and then moldboard plow in one direction. And what that does is it just kind of keeps the field on a level plane over as you keep going. And again, I'm going to tell you that your first pass is your most important because that sets the tone for the rest of your passes. Try to keep it as straight as possible because once you get a little cockeyed, whether you don't pay attention and you start steering away around something or you get off a little bit, once you get crooked, it's hard to straighten that pass up until you're all done, and then you might be able to clean it up later with some other tillage. And so what happens is, so this guy has made his first pass on this field. So he's driving this way, coming towards you, and he's flipping soil this side. So what he's going to do is he's going to pick this plow up. He is going to then just drive all the way back down here with it up, and he's going to put his front tire right here. And he's going to drop that plow in the ground. So he's got one tire, one front tire's in this furrow, okay? And his other tire's up here on the grass. He's going to drop the plow, and then he's just going to make his next pass. And he's just going to keep making that until he is all the way over to the other side. Okay. So again, this guy right here, you can see he's going right along, and it may not look like it, but his front tire is actually right here in the pass that he made previously. So he's going to go right along. So that same front tire right there will be right here when he comes back through. Now, so over here he threw soil on the side, but when he gets over to the end of this field, he's going to have something that looks like this, which we call a dead furrow. And you really, it's important, and this is the other reason why I like to plow one way, is that every time you plow, whether it's once a year or twice a year, move this dead furrow. So if this year the dead furrow's on this side, next year you're going to start to plow, you're going to actually start on this side, and what happens is it helps fill this in a little bit and leave the dead furrow on the other side. And then the year after that, you're going to reverse it and just keep going back and forth. And that will keep you from really making any ditches on either side of your field. It keeps it nice and level. So secondary tillage. So after you get through and you go ahead and you moldboard plow, I guess I should mention too, I'll just go back here real quick. Excuse me. These moldboards can cost, they're all over the place depending on how wore they are, how many bottoms there are. I would say on average you're probably going to end up about $100 to $150 a bottom for manual resets, and probably more in the range of $250, $300 for those that are automatic resets. So they can become quite costly. And again, depends on what kind of shape the whole frame and whatnot is in. So just an idea of what it might cost you for a moldboard. So again, secondary tillage as I started. So once we go through with our moldboards, we still don't really have a seed bed that we could plant into. So we come through with some type of secondary tillage where we break up those clods and clumps, level it a little bit, and then that allows for our seeders and transplanters to move through, or our bedders for that matter, to move through a lot easier. And there are lots and lots of tools out there. Probably the most widely or common secondary tillage tool is a what we call a disc or disc harrow, and again it's just these round disc that as they go through the soil, they chew up and they level out a little bit and they break up all those clods. And what's really nice is that these are they're easy to use. They come in a lot of different widths. So you can find them anywhere, like right here, which is about a 4-footer, up to this one, which is a 14-footer. But just keep in mind that with that extra width, you have to keep increasing your horsepower every time. So something like this 3-point hitch one right here, you can pull with as little as 30 horsepower without really making the tractor work. Whereas this one up here, you're looking at really a 90 horsepower tractor to pull that comfortably. The other thing too is as you get bigger, they no longer become 3-point hitch, but they become hydraulic. So whereas these two are 3-point hitch, so it needs that lift arms that we talked about in the back earlier. This one does not. It actually has a hydraulic cylinder right here, and there's hoses that hook to the back of your tractor, and it actually lifts on this set of wheels right here. But again, that's you're talking about a much larger piece of machinery. And these disc harrows, again, price range is all over the place depending on if they're new or used, and width, and what kind of shape they're in. My favorite secondary tillage tool is something called a Perfecta harrow. I think it pulls a little easier than disc. So it's this toolbar, and it's got these what we call Danish S-tines, and then these sweeps on the end of them. So as this goes through the field, it actually kind of starts to fill in those voids made by the discs, or made by the moldboards that you went through with, and breaks up some of the clumps. And then this right here is a leveler bar, and then this is a rolling basket in the back, which really helps break up those clods and clumps, and really just does a super nice job of preparing a seed bed. And as you see right here, anywhere between 1.5 to 3.5 horsepower per S-tine. And that it varies because of the width of these sweeps that you put on there. It takes a lot more horsepower to pull a 3-inch wide sweep than it does just a 1-inch sweep, as you can imagine. And again, what's nice is they come in varying widths. You can go anywhere from 6 feet to 30 feet wide, and just a very good tool, and a tool that I think at some point in time every farm does need. Another one are these 3-point hitch rototillers, and they are fine for growing very fine seeded crops. They prepare a really super fine seed bed. However, there are some issues. They can be very slow because if you are into something that's got a lot of sod, um, it may actually take you 2 or 3 passes to get a bed like you want it. They are not really made to go very deep, so they're really just like that 3-inch tillage depth, which for some crops is fine, but for others, they like it a little deeper. They can require a fair amount of horsepower, again, because you are, not using 3-point hitch, but also the PTO, the power takeoff, which is going to draw some extra power. And they can be expensive. 900 for a very narrow one. That's probably about a 4-footer. Up to $3,000 on a 6-footer. And again, there are many manufacturers out there. Kuhn, which is the guy on the bottom here, probably being one of the higher end rototillers in my opinion. A very nice unit. The other thing that I don't particularly care for about rototillers is that they pretty much destroy a good chunk of your soil structure. They break this soil up so fine that you can run into some problems with some soil tilt later on. But I think that's a whole nother discussion for another time. This is a piece of machinery which I don't expect a lot of new farmers to have. It's grown in popularity the last couple of years. It's called a spader. And as you can see, it's got these what we call, they call them spader teeth, but they look like giant tines with big sweeps on them, or points. And essentially what they do is they don't really till soil, but they just kind of mix it up and stir it. And then there's this leveler unit here in the back, which helps break up some clumps, push clumps down in the ground, and also just kind of give you a little bit of a level. They again they're quite slow because you need to take your time in order to get enough of those spader knives to go down into the soil. And they are expensive, and you need a large horsepower tractor to run it comfortably. But if you want to see how these work, there's a good website with some good videos right here that you can go ahead and take a look at and see how those units work. Again, I think for beginning farmers, this is a little bit of overkill. And as I said, they had gained popularity, but there are a couple folks that I know that have them that actually have parked them because they were just taking too much time to prepare their fields with them. The advantage, again, is that they are not as hard on your soil as a rototiller, so they maintain a little bit of your soil structure for you. And they are actually very good incorporators of organic matter too, which is kind of convenient. Again, for smaller acreage, I love this unit. This is a what they call a BCS tiller, and they don't even call they call these units tractors. As you can see right here, this is the base unit right here, and what I love about it is the handle, and this is what this is supposed to be depicting. But those handles rotate essentially 180 degrees so that you can have either rear-mounted equipment attachments or front-mounted attachments, depending on what it might be. And the price range, for the versatility of these units is not bad. As you can see, the price for these base units and probably one accessory can vary quite widely, as depending on what you're looking for horsepower wise. And just to show you the versatility of these units, these are just all of the different attachments that they make for these tractor units. And again, things can be rear mounted or front mounted depending on how you swivel the handles. And one other feature that I like about this unit is this is actually what they call their power hiller attachment. And I think in circumstances where you guys might have high tunnels or unheated greenhouses and you want to make some raised beds and you don't want to do it by hand, I think these power hiller attachment units on the BCS tractors could actually do a very good job. So again, these are very versatile. They'd be great for smaller acreages, and especially if you're going to have some high tunnels. I think if you're going to be a vegetable or small fruit grower, especially vegetables, I think you're gonna want to look at using plastic mulches. And in order to really get the benefit out of a plastic mulch, you're going to want a really good bed shaper, or actually a mulch layer. Okay, and here's just a couple different models. Now these are what we call flatbed mulch layers. Okay, or they pretty much just lay that piece of plastic right on level pretty much with the soil surface, maybe just a little tiny bit of a bed, but for the most part it is just going to be right on the soil surface. This is a Buckeye tractor unit. Where is my pointer? That's right here. So this is one without plastic, and here you can see them laying this nice row of plastic. This green unit right here is a rain flow unit, and for I think the larger operations, the rain flow unit is where I would steer you. For a couple acres, these Buckeye units really do a nice job, and they're a little less expensive than some of the Rainflow models. Again, Rainflow is a company out of Pennsylvania that makes a lot of different equipment, a lot of nice vegetable equipment. It's built well, it's heavy duty and rugged, and I highly would recommend you talking to those folks if you're interested in some of these bed shapers. The other option is you can do it by hand. However, I'm going to tell you that to get the biggest benefit out of this plastic mulch, you want a nice tight bed, as tight as you can get it. Otherwise, if it's loose and floppy, you don't get the maximum benefit out of a piece of plastic. But if it's all you've got for the first couple years, it can be done. This is just another flatbed model. This is one made by Mechanical Transplanter Company. And again, all of these models, most of them I should say, can come in various widths, anywhere from, as you see here, a 3-foot wide to a 6-foot wide plastic roll it can accommodate. So again, you can have beds that are 28 inches wide to almost 5 feet, depending on how big you want your beds to be. As you continue to expand maybe your farm, I really think it starts to make sense to look at what we call raised bed plastic mulch layers. Okay, and again, I would steer you to Rainflow. Probably their model 2550 is one of their most popular models, or 2600. And these units, they look big and fairly aggressive, and they are. So you're looking at comfortably probably a 70 horsepower tractor, preferably with 4-wheel drive, to really do a good job at using this machinery. So what you see right here, this is what actually gathers the soil to make the bed. This particular unit is set up to actually apply a liquid fertilizer underneath, and also drip irrigation tape or drip tape. Okay, So you can see that, right here, these units can make anywhere from a 2-inch to a 6-inch high raised bed. And again, depending on what attachments and accessories that you get, they can be anywhere from $3,300 to $5,000. So again, something that you're probably going to think about once you get established and start to increase your acreage. And these raised beds are where you really start to gain some of your production, your yield increases, earliness, and drainage too, especially if you're going to be on heavy soils that tend to stay wet. You may definitely want to think about one of these raised bed shapers at some point in time. Once you get everything made, you get your fields plowed and fitted, and if you're using plastic, you get your plastic laid. You need to get your plants planted. And again, I got to tell you that rain flow irrigation makes what we call a water wheel transplanter. And what this does essentially is, I've got a better picture of it here in a second, but I'll just explain it. These 2 tanks are full of water. And there is a hose that comes down into what we call a wheel, which has these spikes onto it. And as you travel down the field, these spikes roll and they punch holes in the plastic at whatever spacing you choose. The wheels all come in different spacing, so you choose what size wheel fits the crop needs for that particular crop. And as that little steel spike goes into the soil, it actually fills it up with water. And so when you take these plants and you put them in the hole, they are being put right into a transplant hole that's full of water. So this is a different unit. This again is Buckeye, and Buckeye makes a great piece of machinery. Don't get me wrong. Rainflow is not the only ones on the market. These guys do a very nice job, and they actually do a very nice job for smaller scale growers. So these pieces of machinery from Buckeye they're heavy duty, but they are not tremendously overbuilt, but they're very durable. And here again, this is a good picture of that water wheel that I just talked about. And you can see these spikes right here are what makes the holes. And this doesn't have a spike on it, but underneath this spike, if you were to see it, would be this hole right there, which lets the water escape into the hole. So that's a complete water wheel unit right there. You can also just purchase from Buckeye just the dry wheel punch. So after your beds are all made, or even in bare soil, they don't have to have plastic on them, you can actually take and run this unit over, and it'll punch the holes into the plastic or into your soil at your desired spacing. And then you come back through and you can plant it by hand. So again, pretty economical for $600 or so to purchase this unit. And the other thing too is that this is a pretty nice toolbar that you can actually hang some other stuff off of later on as well. Again, mechanical transplanter, they also have their version of a raised bed maker right here. As you can see, it's a lot simpler, not as many parts, and not as heavy, but you need very, very light soils for this kind of unit to work really well. And that's another reason why I like the Rainflow units, is they work in just about every soil type and do a very consistent job in all those soil types. Mechanical also makes a transplanting unit. This is a mulch planter or pot planter model 900 that you see right here. And essentially what happens is, as you drive through, this is ground driven. These spikes that you see right here, these yellow ones, rotate around, and the guy that's sitting here just puts the plant right there in that spike, and then as it comes around, it pushes into the plastic. The spike or the cup actually opens up, lets the plant out, and then right here there are what we call pack wheels, and that pushes the plant into the ground. This is dry, so there's no water or anything involved. They do make them with water attachments. Um, Very expensive. Lots of moving parts. Not as forgiving on transplant height. They have to be just the right. Those transplants have to be the right size. If they're too big, what happens is this cup actually, that little hinge unit right there will close back onto it before it's off of the plant, and it pulls it right back out. Um, I see where they actually tear plastic more, I think, and end up you end up with more problems later in later on. Um, so you can find these out there, fairly inexpensive used ones that are in decent shape, and again, is a good place to start. Although um, I think you can buy a water wheel for probably still less money, and it's much more versatile than one of these mulch planters. So we've talked about transplants. Probably one of the things you'll do first before you do a lot of transplanting is some direct seeding. So in terms of direct seeding units for smaller growers, there's a fair amount of them out there. This particular unit right here is what we call an Earthway. It's made by the company called Earthway. You really need a good seed bed so that the unit pushes easily. This is what we call a plate planter. So you can see that there's all these different inserts that go into this hopper right here, which determines what you plant. And these push seeders are really good for beans, corn, and squash. They are not on the larger seeded stuff they do a good job, but when you get to the finer seeded things like beets and carrots and lettuces, they don't do as good a job. You get they're either too thick or they're too far apart. It's hard to fine tune where you want those seeds to drop. Cole Planet Junior, they have been around for a very, very long time. They are very durable. Again, this is a hand seeder, but you can also purchase these units to go on a toolbar. So this is a 3-row bed that they're planting, and it could be to lettuce or carrots or beets. They do a much better job, more accurate job than that Earthway I just showed you. And they actually don't have plates in there. There's actually a little sizer gauge, and right on the side there, you kind of dial in what your crop is, and it sets that little trap door to let just the right amount of seed through. So they do a good job. Again, they're a little more durable. You need a good seed bed, but probably not as good as a seed bed you need for that Earthway. As you start to increase in the amount of what you want to pay, the seeders get better. These are what we call belt seeders, and you can see that all these different belts are all made for different size seed, different spacings. They can be standalone push units like this, or again mounted on a toolbar. They are very precise. They're very good, but again, they are fairly expensive. $1,500 just for the base unit, and then you have to buy all the individual belts as well. But again, if you're looking at doing a lot of greens, a lot of small fine-seeded things, carrots, beets, onions, direct-seeded onions, these do a very nice job, very precise job on those crops. This is a fairly new seeder. It's only been on the market for a couple years. It's called a Yang Clean seeder. Again, it's sold by Mechanical Transplanter Company. So the same guys that made those transplanters I talked about a few minutes ago. It doesn't use plates or belts, but instead it uses this roller design right here, or right here as you see. And what happens is that they just take these rollers, they drill them out to the appropriate seed size and spacing that you wish for. And again, they can be individual mounted push seeders like this. mounted in a gang like that, um, and moderately priced. For a single unit, push unit, 400 bucks is not bad. They are fairly accurate. And fairly easy to change as well, and that's another key component of some of these units, is how long does it take you to clean seat out and switch out if you're doing multiple varieties of something. So these do a very good job. I know Johnny Selected Seeds is a local distributor here of these units, so you can find them in the Johnny Selected Seed catalog. I think these are always pretty neat. This is a company out of Pennsylvania that builds this, what they call two different versions of a stand-in plant. So this is essentially what you could use for transplanting. Peppers, they have to be fairly small, of course. Tomatoes, eggplant, things like that. Not a lot. It's just by hand. There's not a lot of moving parts. You slip the plant in, push it into the ground, pull the handle, and pull it out, and there's your transplant right there. And then they have this Planet Stick, which you can use for direct seeded stuff. Essentially, you jab it in the ground, and you drop your seeds in right in the top, and pull it out, and keep walking right on down the row. So inexpensive, and can do quite a bit of work. Talk a little tiny bit about some other implements that will probably be used or could be used, especially if you're thinking about doing a lot of not as much mechanization but a lot of hand labor. And I'm going to tell you, I have done an awful lot of hoeing in my life, and there's a couple units that come in pretty handy. This is part of what we call a wheel hoe, and I'll talk a little bit about a wheel hoe in a minute. An earlier version was, again, Planet Junior used to make, they were the first ones to really come out with this type of wheel hoe. You won't find this anymore unless you go to an antique place, but you will find these new versions right here. And then, of course, there's your hand hose, stirrup hose, sometimes they call these potato hoes, and a prong hoe, and of course your old-fashioned spade hoe. So again, talk a little bit about wheel hoes for cultivating, weeding right here. These work well. Even to do a little bit of hilling, or if you want to, make a furrow to plant something into. These are pretty versatile units. And again, that price range is $300 to $400. And you can get down through some tight places. So if you're putting a couple beds of something, or a couple rows of lettuce or carrots or something on a one bed, if you space it right, you might be able to get right down through there with one of these, with a wheel hoe with one of these stirrup hoes right on it. Do a very good job of cultivating. I think crop sprayers is something that we sometimes overlook, and there's a lot of variations. If you want to have the highest quality product, whether it's conventionally grown, organically grown, there are some pesticides out there that are, things like Copper's, a fungicide which has been around for a long time, still does a good job, and just to be able to improve that crop quality, I think, is very important. And there's a lot of versions. You can go very simple with a backpack or handheld sprayer like this Solo unit right here. Or you can get a 15, 20 gallon ATV mounted unit that's got an electric pump, or even mount this in the trailer of a small pull behind lawn tractor. Or you can, as you get bigger, and you need to cover a little more territory a little quicker, you can go to a 3-point hitch unit. That usually has a PTO driven pump, but you can also stay with an electric pump, and that are anywhere between 3 and 200 gallons. And again, the prices range all over the place. $90 for this little Solo backpack sprayer, $100, $150 for the ATV sprayers, and then you can spend upwards of $3,000-$4,000 on a 3-point hitch unit. A unit like you see right here in this picture is probably going to cost you about $450, and then probably another $80-$90 for the PTO pump or an electric pump if you decide to go with that version. So when I talked earlier, I talked about a second tractor, and this is kind of the finesse tractor, or and these are just a couple models. There's a fair amount of models that are out there. All three that you see here are what we call offset. So you're not seated right in the center of the tractor, but you are actually offset so that you get a good view of the crop that you're trying to cultivate. So it's right down there. There's various types of cultivators. All three of these happen to be what we call sweep cultivators, and mounted in all different configurations. The key with that second cultivating tractor, or any tractor that you want to use for cultivating, is the clearance, or the amount of space that's between the belly of the tractor and the crop that you're trying to cultivate. As you can see, these three right here are what we call high clearance tractors. So there is a lot of distance between your crop and also the belly of your tractor. And you want that because you don't want to be really bending that crop over if you can avoid it. So again, these are older units. You can find them out there. They range all over in prices. You can find a Cub Highboy. You may find one with cultivators for $1,500. That's in decent shape. Up to this 274 diesel unit, which you're looking at, closer to $4,000-$4,500 for. But they are still out there and still available. This is a little more of a specialty item. We tend to see these a lot on organic farms where cultivation, especially for weed control, is pretty important. And these are Allis-Chalmers G series. They are they've been around for a very long time. So that if you're looking for a newer version, there is a newer version out there called the Stalkville. And they do make, you can find those. Those are newer units. They look very similar to this, but of course have all the updates of power steering and hydraulics and whatnot. But you can still find these G units around. Again, very versatile. Here's one that's set up with cultivator sweeps, 2 different styles. Here's a unit that's been set up for hilling to make probably raised beds, or to even make raised beds to lay plastic on. And here's a unit that's even been set up for moldboard plowing. Probably the most sought after implement for these G series are what we call a basket weeder. And these are really good for closely planted rows of things like lettuce, beets, carrots, things like that. They do a really nice job. They don't move a lot of soil, but they disturb enough to do a good job of cultivating, as long as the weeds are really, really tiny. And that's the key with really any of the cultivators that you may see or hear about, is the weeds need to be small to do a really good job. This is another one. It's based on an older implement, but they've updated it. This is called the Hillside Cultivator, and these units have become popular in the last few years because, as you can see here, they are able to be used for cultivating between rows of plastic mulch. And these things they're 3-point hitch, but they are hydraulic. They have 2 cylinders up here, which allow the operator to actually move these units in and out depending on how wide they need to go to get across that row. So very versatile, very useful, not only for plastic, but also for bare ground crops too. They do a very good job of cultivating. Something else that you may need, especially if you are thinking about having some animals on your farm, or if you're going to be more on the organic side of things and you're going to be needing to spread compost, are manure spreaders. And again, the key here is to match the size of the manure spreader to your tractor to make sure that you're not going to have a manure spreader that's way too big when you get it filled up to be able to pull. And here's another example too of a tractor, having a tractor that's got a loader on it so that you can actually load these spreaders if you have a bulk load of compost delivered to your farm. This is a drop spreader, so we can use these for lime or fertilizer, and they still make these units. Market Farm Implements, which is a website for you here at the end, makes a lot of these fertilizer drop units, and they're really good if you only want to fertilize certain widths of beds, for example. They do a pretty good job. They're pretty accurate. And I'm not sure if you call this equipment. I consider it a very important piece of equipment on your farm, and that are harvest containers. If you've spent all your time and a lot of money to get a crop to harvest, I think you want to maintain that quality as far as you can, and having good harvest containers, but also containers that maybe can double for marketing purposes, like these shallow gray containers right here. For putting a single layer of tomatoes in, especially if you're growing some softer heirloom types, or even these larger green units. These are great for greens, especially if you got to harvest and then put them in the cooler to cool them down. They do a great job, but they're durable, they're reusable, just as long as you keep them clean, and I think they just help provide a much higher quality crop in the end. Again, these are that motto of work smarter, not harder. And if you only have a small, market garden, these little pull hand carts are great. They got those big flotation tires, so they move easy. The ones with sides are great because you can put some of those harvest containers in there and not have to worry about them falling out. But then also, even just having a hand truck to move stuff around is very useful, especially if you're going to do some farmers markets and you may have to walk a ways. I think every farm probably should also have some kind of I call it a whirligig spreader. There's a lot of different names out there, but you can use them to spread fertilizer or cover crops, or in some instances even crop seed. We actually use a seeder like this right here to plant turnips, purple top turnips for root harvest in the fall. And again, it works pretty well. And there's all different versions. Again, here's a pull type, but then again, here's a hand seeder. It's a sling type to a push type. So there's all different levels of these spreaders that you can go with. Flame weeders, again, if you're growing crops that there are not a lot of herbicides labeled on, or if you're going to be organic, having a flame weeder, and this is a homemade unit made by Michael Kilpatrick, who's a grower up in Granville. So here's his little heat shield unit. So all of his flame is coming out of these 4 ports right here, and then he's got the propane tank right there on his back. Does a very good job. So again, he's got this bed ready. It's probably been ready for a couple days. Maybe he's got some seeds that have germinated, some weed seeds, so he's going to go through, hit it with the flame weeder, If he's done it a couple times, and maybe he'll plant right into it, or he may go through and stir this up a little bit again and come back through with the weed with the flamer in a couple days just to kill any more weeds that may have started. So just another little interesting piece of equipment that could be useful. Irrigation. If you're going to be a vegetable or small fruit grower, you are going to at some point in time need an irrigation system. Whether it is an overhead system like these two, okay, where you're pumping it out to a reel here, or if you're using drip irrigation, you still need a pump to be able to get the water to those lines. So again, it may not be the very first thing that you think of, but within a couple years, you're really going to need to think about some type of irrigation system. So this is obviously not a complete list, but this is a list of places to look for machinery that I often use. I think a good spot to start might be with a local agricultural dealer, like a John Deere, New Holland, or there's a bunch of them out there. It's a good place to find tractors, good used tractors too, but then also to have some support there in terms of finding, matching equipment with your tractor needs and whatnot. Want Digest or Craigslist could be a place to find some machinery. Going to auctions in the fall or spring. There's a publication out there called Fastline, which I really like. I subscribe to the Northeast Regional Edition. You can get it either hard copy, depends on if you want to pay for it or not. You can get it free and it comes once a month, or you can pay for it and it comes on a weekly. But it's essentially a lot of the agricultural equipment dealers, everywhere from Maine all the way down to, I think, Virginia for the Northeast edition anyway. So it could be a good place to at least locate some dealers maybe in your area. Of course, there's websites. Tractorhouse.com is another good place. Wangers is a used equipment dealership in Pennsylvania. They do a nice job, good support. Same with Rotors Farm Equipment out of Michigan. And then I mentioned them once already, and that's Market Farm Company. And the one I did not put here would be Rainflow, but I've talked about them several times. And the other one is Buckeye Equipment Company, especially for those mulch layers or those transplanters, water wheel in particular. Other places, Country Folks Grower, and actually not just to look for equipment, but maybe to get you accustomed to some of the industry in your area. They do a very good job with a diverse agricultural publication. Of course, Vegetable Growers News is another good way. You can look in the classified ads for equipment, but also get a good idea of what's going on in the world of vegetables. And then the other thing too is just get to meetings and talk to other growers. They're going to be one of your best sources of information, I think. So again, we've said this. I think we've gone over this a little bit, but I think you need to really have a good idea of what scale you want to farm, and then put a system into place to make your life easier in determining, what's going to be going in a particular field, for example. I think you need to think about your labor and mechanize where you can. When you purchase equipment, make sure that it's appropriate for your size operation and also for your current tractor that you have. Very important. Don't purchase those implements that obviously can't be handled by your tractor if they're just way too big or too small for that matter. And we have seen that happen where that for whatever reason, it's just a piece of machinery you bought is too small for your tractor. So you've got tire hangover marks, or could be a lot of different things. And I think most important is don't be afraid to ask questions about the equipment you're thinking of purchasing. The dealers, in my experience, most of them are very good. They know their equipment. If they don't know it, they can find out more information about it. And I really do think that a good equipment salesman will follow through from start to finish. And even to the degree where if you buy that machinery from somewhere else, especially used, um, you might be or you should be able to still ask him questions. And the other thing, and we didn't put it back in here, but make sure you find a good mechanic and a machinist if you need one to make your life a lot easier when it comes to repairs on this equipment. That's all I have, Laura, and I hope it was somewhat useful for you. If you have questions, obviously this is a recorded version, so you won't be able to ask me directly, but in this. But you are more than welcome to drop me an email at C as in Charles, D as in David, B as in boy, 13. So CDB13 at cornell.edu. Or you can also ask those questions to Crystal and Laura, and they can forward them to me, and I can answer them back for you. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and take care.